Congresswoman, welcome into the back room.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you've served New Jersey's 11th congressional district since 2019. Why have you decided to run for governor? Why would you ever want to leave that bastion of congeniality, productivity, and bipartisanship known as the United States House of Representatives?
Exactly. Who can imagine why? Well, I'm really proud of my service there. And, I entered service in Congress after, my years in the Navy and at the U.S. Attorney's Office because I really felt like I could bring together a broad coalition of people, get stuff done for New Jersey, and in doing so, fix Congress, make it work again. And I'd say I accomplished 50% of my goal. I'm proud of the work I did to deliver for New Jersey, but I do think Congress is more broken than ever. And it really feels to me as if it's the states and governors that are going to have the power to stand up to what's going on in Washington with the president, all the economic attacks on our states right now. But there's more, right? I'm really excited to get to work in Trenton because as much as I want to fight back against what's coming from Washington, I really want to fight for people in Trenton because there it sort of boils down to what we as shorthand sort of say, kids, cost, and accountability. Because Trenton is not really working for a lot of families either in being too slow to deliver. It costs too much money to live here. And I think in too many cases, the people of New Jersey feel as if their elected leaders aren't accountable in the way they want to see them be.
And so what are your signature issues? What do you think New Jerseyans want and need that they're not getting now?
Well, a lot of it's about driving down costs and improving the experience of New Jerseyans. So, for example, today I just had a whole press conference on how to make sure that we're cutting through a lot of the permitting problems and red tape in Trenton, the save you time and money agenda, so that people who want to open a small business can do so. If they want to grow their business, they can do that. That customer service experience is better. So to give people who don't have the real pleasure, and I do think my state is fantastic, but to give people a sense of what I'm talking about, we were ranked at the bottom in the nation of people who had adopted the Real ID. So as we came towards the end of it, as we came towards the time when airports were no longer going to accept non-Real ID licenses, you couldn't get an appointment. In fact, people were being told, go get a passport. It'll be faster than trying to get a driver's license right now. That's what we have to address. Those are the MVC, the Motor Vehicle Commission, that's one of the key ways in which people engage with government. And if they have a bad experience there, their whole impression of how you're delivering services is tainted. And that's some of the stuff I really want to address as governor.
So your Republican challenger is Jack Ciattarelli. To me, the high point of his decade-long quest to be governor is his fun ad about how to pronounce his name. But what do you see as the key differences between the two of you?
So I was in the Navy for almost 10 years. I went to the Naval Academy. So I have a lot of friends who are not from, who I served with in the military. And in my acceptance speech, I talked a little bit, when I accepted the Democratic nomination, I talked a little bit about my vision for New Jersey, and I contrasted it with what Jack Ciattarelli sees as the future of New Jersey. And one of my friends said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you made up that name for him." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I can't believe you just kept calling him like that Ciattarelli guy." And I'm like, that's his name. I'm like, I just said his name.
Was he pronounce it Ciattarelli or
Ciattarelli, but he heard Ciattarelli.
Okay.
You
could take some license there.
But I was just cracking up. I'm like, no, I didn't make that up. That's his name. So anyway,
that's awesome.
That said, yeah, I think the vision's very different. Look, I want to serve New Jersey. He wants to do whatever Donald Trump tells him to do. Right. And the frustrating part about that is New Jersey is a very complicated state. It would be the 22nd largest economy in the world if it was a nation. We have major businesses. We have a lot of Main Street small businesses. We have pharmaceutical companies. We have defense-based manufacturing. We have medical device companies and everything in between, right? Like there is a lot going on in New Jersey. It's the most densely populated state in the nation. So people won't be surprised that there's a vibe here and a lot of action and energy. And so no matter who the president is, I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican, no governor of New Jersey should abdicate power like that. That's just unthinkable to most of us here. And the fact that he was asked, what do you disagree with Donald Trump on? And his response was, I can't think of anything. I always tell people, like, oh my gosh, I could help him here. I have a list of things that I disagree with the president on. And he's even said that his job is to help the president. That is not his job. That is not the job that he wants to have, which is governor of New Jersey. The job of the governor is to deliver for the people of New Jersey. I tell people, look, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a New Jerseyan first. That is the focus. And so I think that's probably the sharpest contrast.
Well, it should be noted that this faithful, servile puppy dog, for the New Jersey listeners out there, that Chitterelli once called Trump a charlatan who was, quote, not fit for the Oval Office. Now, of course, he's all in for Trump.
Yeah, he has a history of just kind of serving, whatever needs he has at the time. We have a saying in the Navy, shipmate self, meaning you never serve alone. You got to look after your shipmate. You kind of come last. I always wonder what Jack Chitterelli's motto is. Is it self, Trump, self? Or I'm not sure, because you see it again and again in his career. I think he was very against cigarettes until he got a lot of money from cigarette companies. And then he was very supportive of cigarettes. He doesn't stand up to Trump in any way. He said, that he can't think of how he disagrees. He said that if he was governor, he would encourage every member of the New Jersey delegation to vote for the one big, beautiful bill, which is really horrific for New Jersey. And I would say every state, but certainly New Jersey. Again and again and again, he is focused on sort of what I think he sees in his self-interest, but I also think he lacks courage. I think he's just not an independent person who really could lead our state. We deserve better.
Yeah, not independent and not authentic. I mean, I think your state's voters, like most voters, want to see authenticity in his flip-flopping positions. Like most people who are Republican and in service to Trump, they live in fear, so they have to hold his water in order to win a primary or to get elected. And then once elected, or once winning the primary, they're terrified that if they get into office and they don't kowtow, then he will primary them. So that's who he is to me and to a lot of other people. It's just someone who is not loyal to the U.S. Constitution, loyal to the state constitution, loyal to the people who elect him. Like all of them, he's loyal to the king.
Yeah, I think it's hard to see any other way of explaining, because we see that so much in, I guess, every member I can think of the Republican Party. I mean, again and again, it's kind of collapsed. All the people that were willing to stand up against Trump are gone at this point. So you hear again and again and again, oh, I'll never vote for this. This is horrible. I'll never vote against Medicaid. I'll never do this against Department of Ed. I'm going to stand with the people. And then the minute Trump says jump, everyone just says how high. And it got so bad because I'm still a sitting member of Congress, and I was down there a couple months ago, and it got so bad that as there was a bill that was coming to the floor, a Republican member of the House was asked, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I'll probably complain about it a lot and then just vote for it. I mean,
it's like Joni Ernst and what's the dude who said, I don't like it, but then they vote for a bill, the big ugly ass bill, which I call it. It's just crazy how they think there's points to be scored by publicly stating, I don't like a bill that I just voted for. It's bizarre.
I find it so bizarre because to me, as someone, look, I have stood up to my own party when I'm fighting for the people of my state. And so to me, it would be humiliating to suggest to people in New Jersey that I disagree with something, but that somebody kind of put their foot on my neck and made me do it.
Right. Josh Hawley was what I was thinking about. Right.
Yeah,
It is
yes.
kind of startling. Given all of Trump's chaos in his first 200 days and his sinking approval, do you think that Chitterelli being backed by Trump is more of a liability right now than what he might perceive it to be as an asset?
I would think so, but I certainly never take anything for granted. I run hard races. I often take on tough challenges. So I never take anything for granted. I, you know, the fact that Trump is back in office shows you that what I think people will do is not
Right.
correct. Um,
Conventional wisdom is out the window.
right, right. So certainly, I would think that that would be a real liability as we see those jobs numbers. As I hear from businesses, both large and small across my state, that the chaotic tariff regime is really harming them. They're not expanding business because they have no idea who's going to be the target next. So they're not going to develop new markets anywhere because next thing you know, Trump slaps a 40% tariff on some country. Even some of the long-term markets they have, I have one of my huge New Jersey companies has a big market in North America and Canada. And now Canada's put reverse tariffs on the United States. So that's really impacting the business. And there are many people in Canada that now aren't buying American. So that's become very problematic for our businesses. So we just see again and again this huge economic impact. And while there are those of us who care about the attacks on the Constitution and democracy, and I think that's a lot of people in New Jersey. We're a very patriotic state. I also think there's an even bigger pool of people that care very deeply about the economic attacks and the hits to their bottom line and their businesses and their ability to make a living for their families.
Hmm. So you chose Reverend Dale Caldwell, a university president and pastor, as your running mate. What does that partnership say about the kind of leadership and coalition building you're committed to as governor?
Dale, I tell people, like, if I tried to tell you his resume, it would take, all day long. He is just somebody who's been committed to the betterment of the community. He's both worked in our state. He's worked on school boards. He's worked as the president of one of our universities. He started a small business at a small business innovation center. Um, he's just really somebody that's constantly looking to create better pathways to opportunity for people. And that really spoke to me because as a lifetime public servant and as somebody who's fighting for democracy, which the way I define that is making sure everyone has access to opportunity, not just people who are billionaires or know the president, but everyone. That really spoke to me. So I think he's a huge asset. Unfortunately, the one area where we will not have a very good partnership is on the tennis court because he is a world-class tennis player and I am decidedly not. So that is an area where I really wish I could be a better partner there, but unfortunately that will not be my future.
Well, you could get lessons for that.
And maybe I could get, almost average if I did that.
I hear you. So you've promised to change the status quo in Trenton. What is that status quo, and what are some of the changes you'll seek?
You know, I think you hear this a lot across the country, and Trenton is certainly very much fits this mold of an older state with a lot of overlapping permitting problems and regulatory issues. A state that I would say the government and the people have very good values. Like we want our kids to do better. We want a great education system. We want a clean environment. We want clean water. We're dealing with a lot of age-old problems. We have more Superfund sites in New Jersey than anywhere else. I say, we're the state that built this nation and we have a lot of the scars to show it. And so there's just a lot of, like I said, it's a complicated state. And so we've got a lot, we've had a lot of work over the years to address and mitigate a lot of these issues. The problem is oftentimes when something doesn't work, it takes us far too long to change course. And so now, as I'm saying, like, look, we've got to cut through this permitting and regulatory reform because, it just takes businesses too long. I was talking to a woman who was trying to open up a small business, a restaurant. And it took her 8 months to get through the permitting process. And in that time, she was paying rent, she was paying contractors. She kept having to pay new fees because when she would apply for the permit, it would fail. And so she'd have to go back, but there were no resources. She didn't know why it was failing. She didn't know what was wrong with it. So she'd try again, and then that would fail. She'd pay hundreds more, and then that would fail. So it took her 8 months just to open her restaurant. A lot of people can't pay for that kind of process. And yet, when I say, look, we really need to reform this, we need to address this better, because that's all, I talked about Real ID and the problems at the MDC, but also when people come back at me and say, well, what about the environment? Are you saying you're cutting environmental regulations? No, I mean, that's not what this is about, because in fact, these same permitting and regulatory problems have led to us not getting solar farms open quickly enough. And now we're not going to be able to take advantage of some of the federal assistance that we put in place in the last Congress. So, so it's actually harming some of our ability to even create a better environment here in New Jersey. So it's just gotten to the point where it's not workable and it's costing families money. The state's become too expensive, and too many people are kind of looking to the future and wondering if they're really going to be able to make it here.
Mhm. Independent voters remain a decisive bloc in this race. How are you cultivating trust and support among these folks while maintaining core Democratic backing?
That's what I've always done. In fact, in my congressional district, when I first ran, I had to do that because it was a Trump district. So it wasn't simply going to be enough to cultivate the Democratic base. I had to build out from there. And so I've, held my congressional district with the base, the Democratic base, majority of the swing, and then about a quarter of registered Republicans. And so building those broad coalitions. And I do that by listening. I know that sounds a little cliche or a little easy, but when I say listening, I'm listening to thousands and thousands of people across the state. When I'm running hard elections, I'm listening, sometimes I'm talking to thousands of people a day. And so really, as I'm building that out, I hear from people about what it is that is keeping them up at night. What is that issue that's just going over and over in their mind? And largely, if you can get past the partisan politics, it's often very similar things, no matter how blue or how red the town is.
Sure.
And it usually has to do with how you're supporting your family. So whether it's the cost of a house, rental cost, if your kid can buy a house, utility cost, healthcare costs, all these things have been going up every year. Infrastructure problems. So is the train running on time? Can you get home to see your family at night? All of these things often are very similar across the state. And so in listening to people, I then chart out the path forward. The very interesting thing to me, and remember, I'm really the only person I think running in competitive races right now statewide in the Democratic primary. There's only 2 statewide elections. Abigail had secured her primary in Virginia, so I ran in a 6-way primary. So these tough competitive elections, you really have to have a keen ear. And what's really been fascinating to me is that this is the least partisan election I've run in. So my first race was in that midterm after Trump won. That was very partisan. It got probably worse from there until 24, very partisan. And yet I have been all over my state. I was at a SummerSlam wrestling event. I'm not seeing MAGA hats. I'm not seeing Trump signs. I'm not seeing the kind of that kind of like rage that I've seen. And I anticipate I'll have a lot of crossover votes from people who voted last time for Trump and will vote this time for me, because I think what is going on here is that largely people are upset with both parties. And they are really, I think, concerned and scared about what is going on in the Republican Party. And yet they need the Democratic Party to offer a solution economically and a way to fight back. So they're sort of at a point, I think, where they're listening very carefully and want somebody who's going to address those key needs. And that's the campaign I'm building. And largely, I think people just want to see, hey, are you going to help me navigate what's going on right now? Whether is the chaos and the really scary things happening in Washington, or making sure that as our states become almost unaffordable, can you help me secure a path forward for my family? And that seems to be largely where people are at. That's what I'm working to do. And I think that's what connects to people right now here in New Jersey.
Yeah, and if the recent polling for Trump with independents is a barometer, there's a real opportunity there to continue speaking to people, whether they're farmers in Sussex or small business owners in Jersey City, because at the end of the day, they all have the same issues.
I mean, you are singing my song. I think there's a huge opportunity for Democrats to get back to our roots. And I think that's what people hear when they hear that there's this sort of generational battle going on. I think what's going on here in the Democratic Party is this idea of, do you just think this is a 4-year problem? Do you just think you're going to kind of sit back for 4 years and then we're going to maybe win back the House next year and then the Senate and the presidency the year, 2 years later in 28, and then we're going to rescind all this stuff and go back to business as usual? Or do you think, as I do, that something fundamental has shifted in this country and it is going to take a very new, innovative group of leaders to navigate it? Because it's not just Trump. Layering on top of that is social media and AI and data centers and utility costs and power generation. I mean, so many new things, the world realignment. So I don't think it, I have no interest in working to get rid of Trump and then go back to the way it was, because I don't think the way it was working as well as this country should work. So
No, and yeah, and everything's changed to your point, starting with technology right down to the institutional mechanisms that run this country to the rewiring of the electorate.
exactly. Exactly. And we need a new vision to take that on. And if there's a leader that's just offering me to kind of go back to, I don't know, 2023, I'm just not interested. I think we can do better. I know this country can do better. I know New Jersey can do better.
2023 wouldn't be bad. I see some of these people talk, and it's like, what is it, 1988? Like they're really old dogs that don't want to or can't learn new tricks. And the Democratic Party needs to learn some new tricks.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's
Yes.
going to be on the outside looking in for a very, very long time. In our remaining minutes, you mentioned the insanity in Washington and nationally. You're a former Navy pilot. You're a former federal prosecutor. I have to ask you, because you probably have a million thoughts on what you're seeing right now with regard to Trump's nonstop exploitation of the military, as well as his ongoing weaponization, increasing weaponization of the Department of Justice.
It's horrific. I'm a former Navy helicopter pilot. I went to the Naval Academy. I care very deeply about, this country and service and the Constitution and our military. And we now have the most incompetent Secretary of Defense that we've ever had. He's a clown show. And I think that's the intent, to try to undermine the military. Because remember, in Trump's last administration, it really was the one group of people and um, the one thing that was able to stand against him in an effective way. And I think it was no accident that one of the first things he did was start to fire admirals and generals across the board when he came into office. And he fired C.Q. Brown, the Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he fired Lisa Franchetti, the woman chief of naval operations, immediately. And I think he fired C.Q. Brown because he was Black and Lisa Franchetti because she was a woman. He's just moved the Naval Academy superintendent out of her position after only half her term. And he didn't do that at West Point or at the Air Force Academy. He's promulgated stuff on, saying like women shouldn't vote, lifted those posts up. And now we have the president utilizing the National Guard as a police force. Now, as I mentioned, have worked in the military. I sit on the House Armed Services Committee. I've also been a federal prosecutor and worked closely with law enforcement. And I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, that those are two incredibly different missions. So serving as a military member and the training you get to do that is very different than what you do as a law enforcement person. And so having our troops on the street like this is very dangerous. Not to mention having checkpoints when you're being pulled over. I've served all over the world. That is not what I expect or how I expect to be treated in this country. Pretextual searches and seizures, that's unconstitutional. And that's what's going on right now in Washington, D.C. And that's why it's going to be incumbent upon governors to really stand up to this. And you see that across the, I know Wes Moore spoke out about this. He's also a former military. This is incredibly dangerous, what we're seeing right now.
And just within the last couple of hours, I'm not sure if you've had the time to delve into it much, but Governor Newsom out in California gave a press conference / address on the Texas redistricting, and he was on fire. But what was interesting is there were masked ICE agents deployed outside where he was speaking. For what? So we've gone from having ICE be a immigration enforcement force to, what is it, Trump's political police force now? Why was ICE outside a governor's press conference, right?
And why has he upped the funding for ICE so much? And I think, and why has he been training the ICE police force to ignore the Constitution and only pay attention to him? I'll tell you, from his first time in office, he has been looking for a personal military. And I think he's creating one through ICE. And I think, again, it's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. Well, what about the weaponization of the Department of Justice from your perspective as a former federal prosecutor?
He's, again, trying to co-opt all of the tools of power in this country. And so, for example, with the Department of Justice, I served at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Newark, New Jersey. The person in charge of my old office is Alina Habba, who said very clearly that she was going to create a very partisan U.S. Attorney's Office. She's now in that position illegally, and there are lawsuits going on over that right now, but she should not be in that position because she's not been appointed by the Senate. She didn't go through advice and consent. And she is now investigating the governor, the attorney general, a sitting member of Congress here in New Jersey. So that is obviously incredibly dangerous as well. And that is why it's so necessary, again, to have strong Democratic governors, because I think they're the only people to truly stand in the breach right now.
Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on. If people want to learn more about the campaign and support you, where can they go?
They can go to www.mikiesherrill.com, and please do. We can use your support, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Good luck with everything. I'm rooting for you, and I hope you'll come back and talk with us again soon.
I would love to, and thanks so much.
All righty, take care.
Take care.